Hello, my name is Tanisha Langford, and I will be discussing flowcharts. Individual quality tools are techniques used to support and improve the activities of quality management and improvement. There are 7 basic individual quality tools, one of which will be discussed today with flowcharts. A flowchart represents a tool allowing for data representation. In exploring flowcharts, I will be covering the following topics. What are flowcharts? When to use flowcharts? How to create a flowchart? Flowchart case study example, advantages, disadvantages, and alternatives of using flowcharts, example and a question and answer period, and the conclusion. So what are flowcharts? Flowcharts, also known as process maps, display the sequence of steps and branching possibilities that exist for a process that transforms one or more inputs into one or more outputs. So simply put, a flowchart is a diagram or visual representation of a process or workflow. So let's look at 2 different types of workflows or flowcharts. For example, one is a workflow diagram. Workflow diagrams are flow of actions from one person to another or one person to a group. In this example, we have a customer ordering a taxi. Or think of what we know today in ordering Uber or Lyft. With the customer ordering car service by phone or online, it then goes to the network services, and from the network services, the request is sent out to the available drivers in the area. The other example is a swim lane flowchart, which lists more specifics on who does what in a process with multiple participants. In this example, the participants are the consumer, marketing, sales, and the success software, each having a part with the customer placing an order. So when do we use flowcharts? Flowcharts should be used to document a process, to develop understanding of how a process is done, to study a process for improvement, to communicate to others how a process is done, when better communication is needed between people involved with the same process, and when planning a project. So let's go through how to create a flowchart. The data gathered to be represented in a flowchart to allow for decision making are the inputs to the flowchart, such as materials, services, and consumers. The results of those decisions represent the output, which are the actions, the measurement, and the data. So again, your input may be what the service would be, and the output is how the service will be carried out. Now also in looking at how to create a flowchart, let's look at the basic symbols that are part of the actual flowchart. So these include the oval, which represent the start or the end, the arrow, which connects the relationships between processes, the parallelogram, which represents the inputs and outputs, the rectangle, which represents the actual processes, and the diamond, which represents the decisions. So before you physically create a flowchart, the process itself should be written out. So first, determine what software will be used to create your flowchart, with options of Excel, Visio, or other software. The software used is only a matter of preference by the user. Use another IQT tool such as brainstorming with your stakeholders to develop the process, using sticky notes, flip charts, or other methods of gathering the information. So first, identify your participants. Identify your inputs and outputs. Identify the decisions that need to be made, and who needs to make those decisions, and then what happens based on the answer. After the brainstorming session, document the process in writing and linking each activity and run it by the stakeholders for review and approval. Once you have your approval, you are ready to create your flowchart. So let's go through the case study and go through an example of creating a flowchart. So one of Acme's goals was to increase branding by using media. Social media was one factor. So in another brainstorming session separate from this one, it was determined the media sources would be Facebook, Twitter, the local newspaper, and the local television news station for their media exposure. In measuring the quality of these media outlets, meaning which brought in the most attendees based upon how they heard about the event, they will take the registration information of the user as part of that quality and determine which received the highest ratings. So for the focus of our exercise, it will be to develop the registration process. Now this will be same-day registration only because pre-registration will be handled separately. So the Doggy Pal project is the project that will connect the local animal shelter, the veterinary clinic, the veterinary pet store, and a local hospital's autism occupational unit to allow for a family with an autistic individual to adopt a dog and have a dog house built while also receiving free vet services and food for 1 year. So now that we have the objectives as it relates to the case study, let's go through the process for the actual flow chart. So again, first we'll develop the actual software that will be used, which in this case I will use Excel. The brainstorming session will include individuals that were part of last year's event for their knowledge sharing, staff that will handle the registration table, that will be the volunteer staff, and the staff from the process and data analytics team within the Acme Core. The participants for the flow chart will be the actual staff handling the registration and the attendees. Again, we will not take into account anyone that pre-registered. The process is only for same-day registration. So the process itself will start. We're at the event when the attendee arrives and enters the event. At that point, the decision is whether have they pre-registered. If yes, they will gain immediate entry. If not, they will be registered by the staff volunteer in obtaining their name, age, and media source and how they heard about the event. Because again, we're measuring the quality of which media source brought in the greatest amount of attendees. So now that we have the written process agreed on by the stakeholders, we are now ready to do the physical flowchart. So when you do your physical flowchart, you first want to write the title of your process at the top of the flowchart. Next, we again will go with the start, and as you recall, that is an oval for your start. The next is the rectangle process of the attendee enters the event. Then we have the diamond of a decision. Have they pre-registered? If yes, you have the ongoing process next of the attendee enters the event, and then we have an oval representing an end. So again, that process, the attendee entered, we have a decision of are they pre-registered? If they have, yes, the attendee enters the event, that part of the process ends. We go back to whether they've pre-registered. If the answer is no, the attendee goes through the registration process with the volunteer in capturing their name, age, and how they heard about the event, and then that process ends. So let's look at advantages, disadvantages, and alternatives. So the advantages of a flowchart are you gain good documentation, it provides for easy communication, you have good visual representation, and it helps develop new processes. The disadvantages on the other side are it can be difficult to make changes to an existing flowchart. As well, a flowchart may not be the best usage for a tedious or detailed process such as software logic or computer programming logic. And an alternative to actually doing a flowchart is just to have written process documentation developed in different formats. So in closing, let's go through another example of a flowchart. We'll use an everyday process of waking up for work. So you have your start, which is your oval. We go to the first process of your alarm going off. Then there's a decision. Are you ready to get up? You have the diamond. Yes goes to a process of you climb out of bed, and that process ends. We go back to the decision with the diamond. Are you ready to get up? If the answer is no, you go through the process of hitting your snooze button. Then you repeat that cycle of going back to the alarm ringing and the decision of are you ready to get up until you go through a yes and that process ending. If you continue to have no, you continue to snooze, continue to have the alarm ring, and you continue that cycle again until the process ends. So in concluding, a flowchart is an IQT that processes a visual representation of a process. Before physically creating your flowchart, meet with your stakeholders in developing the process in writing. Refer to those basic flowchart symbols and their meanings in listing your start, the oval, the process, the rectangle, the decision, the diamond, and the end, the oval. Flowcharts can be created using everyday tools such as Word, Excel, Visio, or PowerPoint. At this time, if there are any questions, I would like to address those. Here are my references for your review, and I thank you for your time today.